Good morning and welcome again to Coffee with Mr. V. I have to apologise for the slight break in service. I took the week off, if you haven't realised, but we're back again here every morning to just give you a little bit of extra revision, particularly for the upper sixth A level and IB students. But I'm also now thinking about the lower sixth coming into the upper sixth A level and IB students as well. So the first thing that I want to come on with in this session, episode 25, the quarter century, is to look at globalization. Okay, now you know the score by now. If you want to participate with Coffee with Mr. V, go and grab yourself a coffee, and then with me, we're going to do the synchronized sip, and that is still just about going to be the best part of your day. So here we go. Pause me if you need to. Go and put your favorite liquid into a cup, a mug, or a glass. And here we go. 1, 2, 3. I love coffee. So globalization turns up in the edXL specification in 4.1.1. It's the very first part of theme 1. It's an interesting place to put it because I actually think it comes in at the end. Once you've done everything else and you've done development economics, it's not a bad idea to look at globalization again, because I think there might be some things that once you've done development economics that you can see in globalization as well. But nevertheless, we will do it as a standalone topic right now. So here we go. So what is globalization? If you go on to the internet and you type it into Google or you type it onto any search engine, you're going to come up with a number of different definitions for the topic. It is a keenly tested concept. There isn't a unified definition. I think most people come away with this idea of interconnectivity. Sometimes people say it's the world getting smaller. But I would say it's the deeper integration of economies throughout the world. Okay, because we're doing economics, we have to be more considerate of the economic impact of globalization than, say, the political or the social impact. Now, there are those three strands of globalization: economic, political, and social. But it's the economic one that I think we need to focus our attention on. And to that end, I would encourage you to use a definition of globalization which is more centered around the integration or the interconnectivity between different economies in the world. Now, what does that mean? So normally, if we were doing this in class, the next thing I'd get you to do is for you to think about, well, what is it that makes an economy more globalized than another economy? If you was to set out to measure globalization or what a globalized economy is, what would you do? Well, we're not doing classroom activity here. We're just doing a revision class. There is a measure out there. It's called the KOF index. Okay, KOF, KOF index, which does actually measure the level of globalization in a country. And some of the things that they measure, I'm going to write them up here, is so the trade balance, X minus M, as a percentage of GDP. Because, of course, if you're a country that trades a lot, that's a very good indicator that you have an integrated economy with the rest of the world, because you're buying things from the rest of the world, but you're also selling things to the rest of the world. So there's a lot of jobs in your economy that are dependent on trade with other countries, and hence why we're talking about the integration of different economies. You might also talk about FDI, okay? Again, as a percentage of GDP, or you could do foreign investment as a percentage of overall investment in the economy. Okay, you might do it that way as well. For the same reasons, that would imply that you're a highly globalized economy if you have a lot of foreign investors, if you have a lot of non-nationals that own lots of domestic businesses. Okay, another one might be the percentage of workers that are non-national. So the number of immigrants that you have as part of the labour force. Again, that would imply that your economies are very integrated with other economies if you're accepting lots of migrant workers from other places. And similarly, if a lot of your nationals are going overseas in order to earn their money, and then they would be sending a lot of that money back, you would have thought, in terms of remittances or repatriation income. Another thing you might look at is well, not so much for the economy, but you might want to look at something like internet access or number of TVs per household. Ooh, I've spelled that terribly. Okay, number of TVs per household. You could also look at tourism as an indicator of globalization. Those two would be more about probably not so much the economic, but more the social aspect. Okay, the cultural diversity. Are people aware of news outside of their own borders? Do they have an appreciation of what's going on outside? The tourism is coming back to economics a lot. Again, are there a lot of people from overseas spending money in your country, or are you kind of closing your borders, such as North Korea, for example, and not allowing a lot of tourists in? So there you go. I've given you a list there of 6 characteristics of globalization, where at least 4 of them are very heavily economic. Okay, so that's what globalization is. Okay, I think, as I said before, a lot of people have this good idea of globalization. They can't necessarily define it or define it very well, but there you've got 6 good characteristics of what we would expect to see if we were looking at a country. We'd expect them to have high percentage of trade, GDP, lots of FDI, lots of immigrant workers, lots of tourists, good internet access, people buying lots of watching TV about international news or reading international newspapers, that sort of stuff. Whereas if it was not a very globalized economy, then you wouldn't expect to see very much of that. In the Edexcel specification, then, it wants you to talk about the causes of globalization. Why has this happened? Now, most people will say that globalization is a process that has been ongoing since about the 1950s and the 1960s. I don't have a problem with that. But then most people say, well, the internet has caused globalization. But the internet, remember, didn't really start to kind of turn into what we know it as now until the very late 1990s. Okay, so if globalization is happening from the 50s and 60s, then it wasn't the internet that kicked off globalization before that. In fact, what you have is something called containerization. Now, in your own time, you can pause the video now and perhaps look at containerization on Google or something like that. But essentially what it's talking about, it's talking about the standardization of shipping containers. Okay, so before the idea of containerization, you would have ships from different countries going to ports in other countries selling their wares. But they would all have non-standard shipping containers in which their different products would come in. And at the ports, that made it very difficult to take, say, a ship from the UK and then take a ship from Spain, where it's all coming in different sizes and the ports wouldn't know where to handle it. Shipping containers in 2020 are all completely standard. I don't know the dimensions off the top of my head, but if you Google it, you'll see it very quickly. Shipping containers are the same the world over. This is an important part of globalization's history, because what it now means is that ports only have to invest in one type of capital, in one type of machinery that takes that standard container size, is able to kind of pick it up off the ship and then move it across with the crane back into the port. And whereas you might have had to have had 10 or 12 different types of machines for different ships of other countries beforehand, you now only need one type of machine, and you can do that, and you can do the same thing for all the different ships of all the different countries. And that makes ports a hell of a lot cheaper to set up, and it also makes one port totally accessible to all the ships of the world. And that's a huge driver in globalization. Similar to that, you have the rise of cheap air travel, which wasn't so much about freight and commercial goods traveling overseas. Okay, it's not the same as containerization. Containerization was very much imports and exports of goods. Rise of cheap air travel is both from a business perspective, businessmen and women being able to fly to different countries, particularly if you think something like Concorde, which was an aircraft that managed to go from the UK to New York at supersonic speed and did it in about 4 or 5 hours. Okay, Concorde doesn't exist anymore, but you can see how it's very easy to therefore conduct this across borders when you can travel so much quicker than you could have ever done before. Okay, there's nothing quite like a face-to-face meeting across a table to hammer out a business deal. And with cheap air travel, it now becomes a lot easier to do that. Similarly, the number of tourists obviously are going to increase when you've got things like EasyJet and Ryanair allowing people to move to different countries. And no doubt it also makes it easier for workers to kind of go abroad because it's now a lot cheaper for them to get there. This comes in with a rise of global income as well. So not only did air travel become more affordable, but people had a greater income as well, such that they were able to purchase that air travel as well. So you kind of get it both ways. The good becomes cheaper; it becomes cheaper to travel, but also people get richer. So combined, you get this explosion in international travel with people, business and leisure. Okay. Finally, then we can put technology and we can put the internet. But remember, before the internet even, you still had telephones and telecommunication systems, you had fax systems, and then obviously that got completely usurped by email and the internet as we know it today. And the email and the internet is probably the biggest driver of globalization